On this next session on future CX talent strategies, we're joined by Loukas Tourkomanis, formerly from Airbnb and TikTok, to talk about hiring and working from anywhere. Session is coming right up.
The future of work has unraveled long observed practices that may have impeded companies and employees alike for years. At the same time, it brought awareness to the vast opportunities on how the new ways of working can equally support an organization's goals and an individual's personal aspirations. I invite you to listen, learn, and reflect on today's talk on how the future of work is being shaped by hiring and working from anywhere. I'm joined by a CX expert who's a huge proponent for remote work and believes flexibility is tomorrow's currency. He has spent his career in customer support, scaling and managing teams at Teleperformance, Airbnb, TikTok. He's fascinated by the intersection of people and technology and always looking for the next big thing. He loves design, cooking, and traveling, and has developed a knack for how tech influences and shapes culture. Hi, Loukas. Welcome to our talk today.
Hi, Dan. Nice to see you again.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited of what we're going to learn from the conversation, and I'm sure our audience today is equally excited. And we have so much to talk about. But before I jump into all my questions, I certainly have several questions that I have prepared for you. I'd like to know, with so many things that happened, particularly for the past 2 years, and having gone remote yourself, how do you describe a typical workday now?
It's been a journey, I'll tell you that. I think the beginning of the pandemic really caught us off guard, everyone, and I was refusing to admit that this will be a long-term thing. So we thought that it's going to be 1 month, 2 months, and then we'll be back to the office. And then 2 years later, we're still working from home. I hated it at the beginning, so I refused to invest in any kind of setup for my desk, chair, like a proper ergonomic way of working. And then eventually I thought, well, it's killing my back. I need to change the way that I approach this. But it's been fascinating to see how quickly people adapted. And this is a global phenomenon. Like we felt. Sure. Companies felt that remote work is not going to be feasible for all companies. There's data restriction problems, there's connectivity issues, there's a lot of different blockers, but the pandemic forced everyone to do that. And it kind of like opened people's eyes that actually we can do this from home. I can be, if not as productive, even more productive. I don't have to lose time on commuting. I can spend time with my family. I can spend time with my friends. I can walk my dog during my break time. So it really changed the perception of how people perceive their relationships with work. So it's been a journey, and I've been able to adapt to that in a way to make my work schedule and my lifestyle more seamlessly integrated through the day. So I would start my day by syncing with the Asia Pacific teams. I'll take a lunch break. I love to cook, so I'll either cook something or I hit the gym for like 45 minutes to an hour. And then I'll start for the second part of my day where I'm talking with my EMEA counterparts, with my North America-based counterparts. So I'm able to structure my day around my schedule. And I like it's so hard to go back from that.
Thank you, Loukas. A lot we're not really prepared for what happened, but I'm happy that you have adjusted well now and realized that there are actually a lot of perks having to work from home. I'm going to jump into my first question, and this is a long one, but I think this is a beautiful question to start a conversation today. All right, the pandemic forced many companies to adopt a different working model in order to survive. We have seen an evolution over the past 2 years with going fully remote, and a lot of back and forth was happening. Attempts to return back to work, then with the resurgence of new variants of the COVID situation, postponements, and a lot of efforts reverting back to work from home model. Which phase or stage are we in now? What do you think?
I think we're probably in the most interesting phase because for the first time since the pandemic started, this is now a side-by-side comparison between companies who are asking employees to come back to work from the office, and companies who have fully embraced the fully remote, the remote first work style. So it's the first time that actually employees have a choice. Do I go with this mandate and return back to the office? Do I resume my commute routine? Or do I go for a different way of working that has served me great over the past 2 years? And I think this is where the intersection is fascinating, because it's history in the making right now. We don't know how this is planned out. I think the remote camp is going to win, because the benefits are just so much higher, and the employees are just going to vote with their feet. They're just going to go for the remote first opportunities. But you do see a dichotomy between what we call like big tech. So your Apples, your Microsofts, your Amazons, your Googles of the world, Facebook and all that. And then you have your like new age tech. So, companies who have either started the past 4, 5 to 8 years. And then all the newcomers that were like born in the pandemic and have, essentially every company that has started the past 2 years is fully remote. There's no company, there's no new tech startup that has offices. They don't need to have offices, because we know that we can do the same kind of job more productively. We can still build engagement and culture remotely. So there's no need to spend millions and billions in like infrastructure and offices and like networks and all that. So it's we're seeing that difference between these two camps. The larger, more established companies want people to go back to work, to the office. There's a few reasons for that. I think from a management perspective, a lot of these companies were built with face-to-face engagement. So it's basically changing the DNA of the company. And it's a very tough decision to make from a leadership perspective. And second of all, like a lot of these companies have invested billions in like fancy offices and benefits for their employees. And if you take that away, like if you take a great workplace from Google, right? Google was built, the reputation was built on the offices. Like if you take that away, it loses part of its DNA. So what do you do there? It's a very difficult decision. And the Google CEO has publicly said, I don't know how to build the same strong culture remotely than what we've been doing all these years, which we've relied a lot on the day-to-day face-to-face engagement. So it's a tough choice, and it's an inflection point in terms of what will happen, how will top talent react, and what will companies need to do to adapt to this new way of working. So it's really fascinating to be in this moment of time right now. Sure. And I think that the benefits that people are having today and the sacrifices they will need to make in order to return back to a commute routine are just going to be way too high. So they're not going to go for that. They're gonna prefer the remote camp, and if they haven't done already, they're going to start looking for a job quite soon.
Thank you, Loukas. It's very interesting to know that employee preferences do not match the management view on working dynamic, as you have pretty much mentioned, and how important it is to, you mentioned building a strong culture, which certainly has a huge impact to organizations. My next question is, how are companies reacting to this employee preferences?
Yeah. They're like, a lot of them are struggling. Like you saw recently, you saw Apple announced for the third time they're postponing their return to office mandate. And you also have other examples, like Airbnb recently announced that they're going fully remote, and their career page had like 800,000 people visit the website the next day after the announcement. So like you see this dichotomy of companies who are like reluctant to change, or are kind of being forced by the workforce to be more flexible. And you have other companies who are like fully embracing it. They're setting a trend. And then it's going to become one of those things where it's like table stakes. If you don't offer this, if you want to attract highly skilled knowledge workers, if you don't offer flexibility, you'll just not be able to compete in the global talent market. And it's brutal out there right now. It is And
Right.
it's an employee's market right now. Companies do not have the same kind of leeway that they had in the past because there's more options and there's a talent crunch, and employees know that. So it's on the employees' court right now. But like, companies not being able to react or not offering a lot of these things, they're just going to be way below or behind the curve. So they're going to be playing catch up.
Thank you, Lucas. It's nice that new companies are realizing, as you mentioned, the perks, the beauty, the impact of this work from home setup has brought in, and how there is a need to adopt to it and offer really more of that flexibility. Lucas, my next question is, what are some of the broader implications of this new way of working? I think our audience will be very much interested to know what are those new ways of working with this new setup.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things on the engagement side. It's going to become a challenge. How do you drive engagement in a virtual world? And also like the ways of working, like you would normally just walk up to a colleague's desk, or you would go to bump into someone on the hallway to the bathroom or the pantry area, and you would like ask a question, or you would get like a business update. So you had that touch point that you no longer have in this virtual world. So the ways of working have evolved, and companies also have to adapt to that, because it's hard to keep growing and build engagement and culture when you're only doing that remotely. So things like documentation, things like asynchronous work, things like having space and time for teams to get together that are not 100% about work and build that culture and that engagement are going to become very important aspects of this new way of working. But also, I would say that the impact of this is the in a traditional work model where you would go to the office and you would build like really strong connections and relationships with your peers. It makes it more difficult to leave that organization. The barriers to switch for candidates who move to another job are much higher, because they have friends now. They have like a good relationships with colleagues. They love the office. They go out to lunch together. They have a community, and the face-to-face engagement is very important. So if you don't have that, if you've been working purely remotely for like a year, 2 years, leaving the organization is much easier. So this new way of working does have a challenge of like, how do you increase retention? How do you make sure that you engage, develop, and keep your employees happy in a virtual world, while also making sure that you are true to the business needs and you help the organization grow?
Thank you, Lucas. You mentioned several things in here. You mentioned adaptability. You also mentioned the importance of virtual engagement, and how impactful that would be to organizations, and how that would be very beneficial to employees as well. Being a leader who is fascinated by the intersection of people and technology, that was in my introduction, what can you give to our audience? What practical recommendations can you share on how companies can keep the balance?
I think you have to, it's easy to, empathy is not easily replicated or practiced online. Like it's much easier to send like a short message if you're using Slack, or if you're writing an email. Written communication is not the same as face-to-face engagement, and like we've all seen this in the past. Maybe there was a colleague where in emails or in writing they sounded much different than when you were face-to-face with that person. So that's going to be like it's very difficult to decipher sometimes written language and extend empathy. So I think empathy and strong leaders have to realize that you need to be empathetic, and you have to like use technology, but also keep like the human side of things. And picture that you were speaking with someone face to face. Would you say or do what you are saying or doing right now? Would you send that message? Would you say that thing over a call? So empathy. I think also documentation is very important, because if you have a colleague that's like in the West Coast in the US, and then you have another colleague who's like in Asia Pacific or in like Eastern European time, how do you make sure that you keep everyone in the loop? How do you make sure that you make people feel like they belong in the organization, regardless of time zones, regardless of where they're located, regardless of their work schedule? You can't expect people to work in the middle of the night just to have a face-to-face meeting with their manager or with like all of their colleagues. So rotating meetings with different time zones, strong documentation on decision-making, assumptions, and tasks that have to be carried out by different team members. And I'll go back to my first point again, like empathy. It's so important that we exercise empathy, and we find ways to do that in this virtual world where you don't have that chemistry, that face-to-face connection that you would in an office environment to really build strong bonds between people.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think that's a very important, consequential piece in relationship building. I love that you said use technology and keep it in still use that human side of things. I think that's a very good reminder to everyone, to our audience today. Now, I am nearing the end of our session, but I still have 2 questions for you, and I'm throwing in, well, I always like to throw in a question in here that's not on my script, so I hope you're ready. Having to talk about the adjustments that you made about you working from home, my next question is, and you kind of mentioned a few of those things, but what else, what do you love about working from home pertaining to that setup?
What do I love? I mean, I love cooking. I absolutely love cooking. So the fact that I'm able to like spend 45 minutes of my time just to like pop in the kitchen and like create like a homemade meal instead of relying on like takeaway or going out for lunch, it's just like such a game changer for me. Getting fresh produce, having something fresh and healthy and tasty. It's like, it sounds such a small thing, but like I've talked to people and they said like the fact that I can walk my dog, I can spend time with my dog, the fact that I can like, spend time with my kid, like drop them off to school, and or like feed my child in between breaks, like it gives a lot of purpose, a lot of meaning to people. And it's really the small things that matter, that it's just impossible to recreate in an office environment. So like for me is the flexibility that I mentioned before, the fact that I can go to the gym, or I can like adjust my time is important, but like it's the small things that matter. And for me, cooking is one of those things.
Thank you, Lucas. Now, my next question, and will be the last one for our conversation today, is the future of fully remote? What are your thoughts on this?
So I think there's 2 camps right now. There are people who advocate for more face-to-face engagement and are advocating to basically return back to an office environment, or have a hybrid model where you spend 2 days of the week or 3 days of the week working from home, and then the rest working from the office. And then there's the fully remote, or the remote first camp, if you wish. I think there's like very strong pros and cons for both sides. Companies tend to prefer the first one because they can build more engagement, and they can drive a stronger drive for the employees to connect and to engage with each other. Employees prefer the second because it just gives them more flexibility. And the downside of not being able to build those connections in person with their colleagues is less than the downside of like having to spend 2 hours, 3 hours of their day commuting, or spending money on like, takeaway, or not spending time with their loved ones, their family members, or like, doing what they love. I think the answer for me is somewhere in the middle. one thing's for certain, that the future is more remote than it was pre-pandemic. A lot of the roadblocks that companies had are no longer excuses for not allowing remote work. So it's definitely going to be more remote than before. The question is, how far do companies go to offer that? And it really depends on like, what is the market demanding and what are employees actually asking for? In today's market, if you don't offer on the spot, you're going to lose the candidate. You're going to have, because candidates have options, and top talent, they will just go with the employers that offer most of their requirements when it comes to flexibility, when it comes to benefits, when it comes to like a strong mission for a company. And like we've seen this, companies who have had long interview panels or very lengthy times to get back to the candidates, they're just losing, like they're not able to compete. My offer was actually 9 days after I started interviewing, which was like, I was blown away. And apparently we can do even faster. So the market right now is demanding for faster action from companies. And we're also having this very interesting dynamic, which is people who have moved into the remote first camp, they will not go back to commuting to the office. And people who are forced to go back to the office, they will happily switch over to the other side. So you have two sides of the equation where one is not moving. Like, ask anyone who's working fully remote if they want to go back to the office or if they will ever go back to the office. And then you have the other side who's like looking to go into the
That's right.
remote camp. And you have like every new company that has started past 2 years is fully remote. So like, there's no need to spend money on office space right now. And you have this workforce that's just not moving back to a different way of working. So I see this as almost like an unstoppable trend. It's just a matter of like, how long will it take? And like, how far are companies willing to go? Because the future is not fully remote in the sense that we disengage ourselves from face-to-face interactions. And this is one mistake that people who are real strong advocates of office work, they think that remote work means you do not have spent any time face-to-face. That's wrong. You need a good balance of both. You need the employee to have that flexibility, to be more focused, to work with their own life parameters, and live healthier lifestyles. But you also need that face-to-face engagement. So the successful companies are the ones that are going to find a good balance between the two and have a version of remote work where you can work your day-to-day routine, and then you either create hubs around the world where people can gather and meet up in person, or you have quarterly offsites or team building engagement activities that foster this kind of engagement. Because going back to my previous point, the barriers to switch jobs right now are very, very low. And the reason they're very low is because you don't have that strong engagement that you normally had in a face-to-face work environment. So successful companies are the ones who are going to find the right balance between the two, offer that flexibility for the employees, but also build that culture and engagement with face-to-face activities. Because there's something magic when you bring people together in the same room. Like, you cannot replicate that with just a Zoom call or cameras and microphones. So I'm very excited to see what's going to happen. My vote is on the remote camp. And I just really hope that more companies will embrace this. They'll help our world become a bit more sustainable, because we cannot continue at the stage that we are today, both from an environmental impact perspective, as well as from like a work-life balance and a mental health perspective. We've had a tough 2 years with COVID and a lot of things upside down in our world, in our lives. So I think a good balance between those two would be the secret sauce. But like we said before, it's like history in the making. So I'm excited to see what's going to plan out.
Thank you, Lucas. And as you said, the secret sauce is about balance, and the way to go about it is really fully embracing the new setup. And you mentioned how important it is to build a strong culture, how we should make that sincere connection with everyone, and it's really just cracking the code. And that is just finding the right balance. Thank you very much, Lucas. This has been an eye-opening conversation, and I now have a better understanding of the expansive intricacies of the future of work and how much promise and potential it offers. And I bet our audience has learned a lot from this conversation. Is indeed an evolution that continues to unfold right before our eyes as the future is still being written. And what a remarkable take on this. And I'd like to thank you for being with us today, Lucas.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan.
It's a pleasure that you're with us today. And to our audience, we'll see each other in the next conversation. It's been a great time having this conversation, and we'll see you again in the next conversation.
Thank you for joining us on this session of Transformative CX Talks. We have more discussions from esteemed CX leaders, so make sure to check out all our videos to learn more about the CX industry.